Hi.
Welcome to my closet.
Welcome to my living room.
Exactly. Yes, all the way across the country. Where are you in Ontario?
I'm in Nova Scotia.
Are you in Nova Scotia?
I am.
Very good to know somebody in Nova Scotia. I love visiting out in your part. It's beautiful. So where in Nova Scotia are you?
I'm about an hour outside of Halifax. Hour,
Lovely.
hour. Yeah.
Yeah, we visited there a few years ago. Gorgeous place to live. Kind of cold in the winter, right?
Yes.
Yeah. We thought about moving to PEI when we first started homeschooling. That was the intention, move to PEI. It's like an Anne of Green Gables kind of experience. But anyway, now we're in BC. So it's really good to finally put a face, a voice. I feel like I know you, which everybody is probably saying, right?
No, not really.
No, this has been a busy year for you too.
Fairly busy. Yeah.
Yeah,
Lots going on, but
and
you know,
a
that's
lot.
pretty normal.
Is it really
Yeah.
good?
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear someone say that.
Well, this is the first year I haven't worked like 4 jobs and homeschooled, so it's not as crazy. So it's kind
Yeah.
of nice, but
Okay, you're definitely the exception to the rule here, then I think. I have literally never heard anybody say, yeah, it's kind of normal. That's great. Finally. Yeah. So it's really lovely to have you here and to chat with you all the way across Canada. Jen, for those people that don't know you or aren't familiar with what work you do, would you share a little bit about yourself and where you're focused?
sure. So, my name is Jen McKinnon, and as she said, I live in Nova Scotia, Canada. So, I homeschool now. I only homeschool one. My son just graduated in June, so he is 18, and my daughter is in her final year. She will graduate next month, and she is 16, almost 17. So I am an accidental homeschooler. I had no intentions to homeschool because homeschool people are crazy. It's true.
I believed exactly what you just said. So that's why I'm giggling, going, yeah, I remember thinking that.
Yeah. Um, but um, so I didn't start off as a working mom. I actually returned to work. It's a major challenge for me, but I've overcome it, and now I've been working and homeschooling. We are entering our final and 14th year, so
Yay.
it's bittersweet. It's like we homeschooled since the very beginning, and when I first started, I was like, I'm never gonna make it, and now that it's almost over, it's bittersweet.
Yeah, I know you don't really think of them growing up and leaving the home, even though and my experience too, my oldest is almost 20. She is in Ontario. And then my second is graduating this year. She's going to be 18. And I have two others. I have a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old. But you don't really think that they're going to really leave. You don't have that as part of your parenting plan. But then they get to be that age and you're like, maybe it would be a good idea. Even though the shift, even the identity that we have as homeschool moms, and then going, okay, so am I still a homeschool mom or what am I outside of that? But I bet you probably engaged that discussion a long time ago in your homeschool path because you're not just a homeschool mom. You don't identify as just a homeschool mom. Not that that's not amazing thing, by the way,
Mhm.
but you're also, working full time. You said you had 4 jobs or 3 jobs outside.
I did at one point. So, right, because of COVID, I've lost a few jobs, just like many of our moms that we're talking to, and it's definitely a struggle. But now I do 2 jobs from home, and then I have one that I go outside. For now, the second wave is coming through, so we'll see how the lockdowns and restrictions affect that. But as far as identifying as a homeschool mom, the one thing that I've learned, and if you're brand new to homeschooling, you may not feel this way yet, but your kids are always learning. So I think to a degree, we're always homeschool moms as long as our kids are home because they're always learning. I found my son graduated in June, but trust me, there is a lot of things he is still learning every day. So I find myself slipping back into that teacher homeschool mom mode with him, working through the process, especially with like cooking. I mean, he's been cooking for ages, but we're always learning and trying new things and financial things, and he has a job and he's having a car, so you have all of the new information, because as you said, eventually our kids are going to move out and we want to make sure they have all the skills they need to succeed, or at least know how to learn so they can learn new things as they go. So I haven't quite turned off the homeschool mom yet. I don't know if I will. Hopefully I won't be calling them on the phone.
Yeah, I find there's a certain transition, like somewhere, at least in my three girls, I've noticed that there's like a certain age, and I don't want to put an exact number to it, but like maybe 13 to 17 or something, somewhere in between there. All three of them had like a radical shift, individuating, it's called, away from us as a family, and they wanted to establish their own sense of self. And sometimes that meant that things didn't feel as fluid in relationship with them. And it's hard to accept that that's kind of the way it is, or it's not quite the same as it was when they were little and they were so eager to hang out with you and show you their Lego pieces and all of that stuff. And then they get older, and then when they get outside of home, it's almost like they come back to you in spirit. And then they're like, hey, mom, what about, what would you do in this scenario? And I'm like, yay, you get to still be a mom. Who knew? I mean, nobody's asking me for details now. I actually have one kiddo who's almost 20, who will actually tell me that I think that you're teaching Latin the wrong way, because she's doing Latin in university now. So there is that element of parenting too, homeschool parenting. But
Yes.
so you've got two kids, one's graduated, one's almost graduated. Is it going to shift how you're doing things now?
I'm not really sure. The one thing I've noticed, as a working mom, we tend to teach our children to be independent learners at a younger age, because it's really important. They have, especially where I worked outside the home. So a struggle I had to overcome was, how in the world was I going to teach my kids when I wasn't, right? So they would do, so they had to learn to be independent learners. And when your kids hit like that teenager, high school age group, it's really interesting, because I was not going to homeschool high school. It was like not going to happen. It wasn't in my plan. I was going to do correspondence and let someone else kind of do it. And then what happened is the courses available were not enough to reach the credits that they needed to graduate. So I sat down and talked with my kids, and I was like, hey, do you want to try public school, or should we keep homeschooling? And they both decided that they want to keep homeschooling, which left me scrambling. But what was really amazing about it is all of a sudden I stopped becoming so much the teacher and kind of got to take a back seat and let them take control of their education. And so my son jokingly says now, well, I homeschooled myself through high school, which in a way was true, because the math he did, I mean, there's no way I could have taught him. And he did all the research, and he learned from videos, and he learned through text, and he made it through. And his sister's using a different program. We use CTC Math, where they basically teach them and check all the work and stuff. So as far as a shift, it's not that massive. I think if I had been a homeschool mom who wasn't working and hadn't taken that step to have independent learners, I may have feel the loss more. But because, my kids are pretty independent, and the things that we still do together will be things that we'll keep doing, like art, and, it's part of life now. It's not so much just schooling. So hopefully that shift won't be too much, but I guess I'll find out when she graduates.
Yeah, that's right. You're going to watch to see what happens. And that's kind of the interesting unfolding of this whole parenting thing, is that you hold them in your arms and you go, oh, maybe they are going to be like this, or maybe they look like they might do this thing, but they surprise you. And it's kind of a cool story to follow.
It is.
So tell me, you've heard this a lot this last year, as I have. What do I do when I'm bringing my kids home to homeschool for the first time? And, not in the classic homeschool way. A lot of people are forced to be at home with their kids in a different, context than most homeschoolers really experience before this year. But what are your tips for people to actually get work done, perhaps to build boundaries with their kids so that they can actually work when they are at home?
That's a really good question. So it really depends on your work schedule and how much control you have over it. That would be my first thing, is that you need to know. I know some moms that I work with, they have zero control. You know, they have to log on at 8 o'clock in the morning and they have to work through till 5, and they're allowed 2 breaks. And so if you're in that situation, it's also going to depend on the age of your children, right? So if you have little ones, you know, they're not going to understand what's going on depending on the age. So in that situation, and with restrictions, of course, you want to be safe, but you may need to bring in childcare if the child's very young. But if you have older children, I usually recommend, you know, getting your kids used to you working. So, you know, we used a timer, which is super simple. It's such a simple concept, and yet it works. So I liked visual and audio. So you know, I'd start really small, start with like 5 minutes, and I'd say, okay. And sometimes I wore a hat. So they had that extra hat. So we called it like my thinking hat. And so I'd put the hat on and say, when mommy has her hat on, you know, you cannot interrupt for the next 5 minutes. And then when the timer goes off, I take my hat off and I spend the next 5 minutes just with the kids. So they understood, okay, if they were waited, and you know, you want to set up those boundaries. Like if the child is hurt or the house is on fire, obviously they can come and interrupt you. We need some common sense here. But you know, you kind of slowly train them. And I also recommend creating activities and things that your children can do. Because if you leave a child unattended for 5 minutes, you will learn exactly what they can accomplish in 5 minutes. And I guarantee you it is more than any adult can do in 5 minutes. They can distort your house, they can redecorate your walls, depending on the age. So I always recommend that you know, you have some things, we call it strewing, if you're familiar with that concept. It's kind of this psychology of just leaving things out and not necessarily assigning it, so it catches the child's curiosity. You know, so we use coloring pages, we had Play-Doh and Legos, and you know, it really depends on the age of the children. As they got older, they were able to, you know, tackle the core subjects. So they would, you know, dig into a reading book, or they would, you know, knock out a math lesson. And then what I really appreciated about the break was you could spend that, you know, 5-10 minutes checking in with the kids. You know, how are you doing? Are you stuck? Do you need any help? And they kind of got used to the rhythm. Again, it would depend on what control you have over your schedule, you know, what type of job you have, if you can take those breaks. But that's one thing that I usually recommend starting with, is getting your kids used to the fact that you are not available to be interrupted for at least 5 to 10 minutes, and then slowly work up to like 30 minutes. You can't really do a whole lot of work in 5 minutes. You can kind of get started, but you can't really dig in. But it's teaching your children and getting them used to the fact that you are not on call and you can't jump up and help. And they do get used to it. I mean, it's usually hardest on the mom not to jump up when they say, mom, mom, mom. You know, you have to train yourself. And when you're like, 1 minute, I still have my thinking hat on, we have like 1 minute and 32 seconds, you need to wait, then they kind of get used to it. And then you really need to stick with it. You know, if you say, I'm going to work for 5 minutes, I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes with you, you need to set that 5 minutes aside and spend it with your kids. And it's kind of a great way to release that mom guilt of I'm always working, because your kids get that one-on-one time with you as well.
It was your tip that has stuck through me, or it was your tip that stuck in my mind all year long, about putting an alarm clock outside the door so that people would know that mom is not available. And that's just a great tip. Teaching kids to stay outside the door. Having said that, I also suggest not locking a bathroom door and going into the bathroom, because it's guaranteed someone will come say the house is on fire. My 18-year-old did that last year. Not that the house was on fire, but she's like, Mom, I need to talk to you. I'm like, you know, I'm in the bathroom.
Yeah.
The tips that you have there, those are for younger kids. What age would you generally think? I know that everyone's child is different.
Yeah, so everyone's child is different. I usually say start pretty small as far as time, even with older kids, because we have to realize it's an adjustment for you and your kids. So this is brand new to them. They are not used to, especially if you're different in the public school system. So first of all, you're introducing brand new homeschooling. You're introducing brand new routines. And now you are there, and the problem, or well, I guess it's not necessarily a problem, but your kids are used to you being available when you're at home. They're not used to you working. You're not used to working. And so I still recommend, even for older kids, to start at a small time. You might be able to start with 15 minutes because they're older and they have a better concept of time. But to give yourself and your kids grace, realize it's going to take time for them to get used to all the new things that you're starting. And they're going to have big emotions and feelings about it. And so are you. And you're going to have bad days. And you're going to think, what in the world did I get myself into? And then you're going to have these amazing days that you're like, okay, this is why I'm doing this. So give yourself some grace to, make mistakes and have those bad days. But yeah, I usually recommend starting with I wouldn't start any longer than 15 minutes to begin with, even with, 9, 10, 11-year-olds. If you're up into like high school, it's a little bit different because sometimes your kids don't even want to talk to you.
Yes.
You don't have to worry about them interrupting. It's the other way around. You have to go interrupt them and say, hey, are you okay?
I do. You still here. Yeah. So true. Yep, that is so true. But actually, if all these families that are bringing home their kids for the first time, the entire, like whether they're 5 or whether they're 18 or 17, they really are adjusting to being at home together. And so then you're really identifying all the family challenges that are there that maybe not, or maybe haven't been spoken, like boundary issues, the difference between me being available, I'm right here, and you over there, and we're going to coexist. We're going to go do our things, but like you said, I'm not always available. Lots of challenges for families to engage. But I'm going to go back to a thought that you had about multitasking, or at least I see it as a multitasking endeavor. As a parent that's at home all the time with their kids, we are really good at multitasking, but the research shows that it's actually not a useful strategy to actually get stuff done, is to try and multitask. In the little bit that I did for research, I discovered it really is a myth that we can get so many things done in, say, a half an hour period or an hour by moving back and forth around the table to do a math workbook with each of the kids, and then also to do our own work and our table right behind. And we feel like theoretically we're getting lots done because we're moving back and forth, but the research says we actually are not as productive. So do you have any tips, any ideas of how to engage that as a homeschool mom?
Well, I always think that there is a time for multitasking, but it I have a different definition of it. Well, not really. Anyway, before I confuse you. So there are certain things we can do at the same time. For example, you can throw a load of laundry in the washer and then go do something else while it's washing, right? And technically, you're multitasking, although you're not the one standing there scrubbing the clothes. The washer is doing it. So I think there are certain things you can do at the same time. For example, you can fold laundry while giving your child a spelling test. Chances are you're going to be able to do both. But I do believe that is a lot of value in single tasking, and that's focusing on one thing. And that's why, I recommend starting small. And I said, but you're not really getting anything done with those small time periods because your mind cannot switch back and forth we like to think we can, but it exhausts our brain, switching and switching and switching. So once we get those 30 minutes, now we can single task. We can dive into that math lesson with our kids for 30 minutes and really understand, do they understand the concept? Are they getting it? Are they stuck anywhere? Now you can really help them and spend that time. And then you can walk away and focus on your work for 30 minutes. And that gives your brain that time to switch from one task to another. I also recommend scheduling in white space, even if it's only a couple minutes. It gives your brain that chance to let go of the math lesson and then figure out what you're going to be doing next. Because if you dive from one, or at least myself, if I dive from math into writing something for my readers, my brain hasn't made the switch yet. And so I'm still thinking about I'm running through the equations while trying to figure out whether this is written correctly. So, and when I worked outside the home, white space was so important because you had that time that you needed to remember when you're booking, like the driving time and the time to get changed. But it was a little bit easier because you were in the car. So the only thing you could really focus on was driving, and your kids weren't in it. So it kind of gave you that mental space to unwind. And I actually used the car as a great place to practice self-care, because you could listen to a podcast you wanted to listen to, you could listen to an audiobook, you could crank music your kids hated and sing out loud and release all that stress. So by the time you got home, you were now finished being working mom, and now you could be homeschool mom or just mom,
Mhm.
which was really great.
So I have a thought about the math angle. This is the first time, I think I've been homeschooling almost 15 years. And the first time I ever this morning had my child do a math lesson for me where they were actually quizzing me. I've had them teach me things before, which I find useful, but he was actually quizzing me and he thought it was fun. And frankly, it's going to be a quick revelation how far I get, because he is in grade 7 and I'm pretty sure I top out at grade 9. But it was a useful approach to learning math, is actually getting him to quiz me and see if I could do it. So I knew he actually was teaching it and processed it. But when you're talking about the myth of multitasking, or you're talking about how it's a challenge to focus on something and really get something done, I actually am reminded of the time alone that I have, which is few and far between. But when I have time alone, I get stuff done so fast. It is amazing to me. How do you do that yourself to get time alone when you're working at home and when you're homeschooling at home? Do you have a process, or do you have a pre-planned schedule for creating those margins in your life? Or you said white space in your life. How do you do that?
Well, I'm a big planner girl. I because my brain cannot handle all the things. And it's everyone says, okay, if you only had one tool to recommend to a working mom who's also homeschooling, what would it be? And every time, hands down, I will say a planner. And I don't have a particular planner in mind. You can use whatever you want. Some use Trello boards, some use sticky notes on a wall, whatever releases stress and anxiety and gives you that sense of what needs to be done. So in my planner, I write in the space. Like, I make sure I have space in my planner. I'm a big believer in less is more. So for example, today I knew I had to work this morning, and then I knew I had this wonderful podcast with you. So I made sure that there was at least an hour, because I actually had to work outside the home today. So I knew I had to come home and get changed and eat and catch up with the kids. And the really great thing about my schedule now is my kids are older, so finding that alone time is pretty easy. I just say, hey, for the next hour I'm going to be talking with Teresa, can you stay in your room? And they're teens, they love it in there. But when the kids were younger, it was much more difficult. So my husband and I would switch off. He would work all day and I would work all day. So we had a sitter. We had to hire someone to look after the kids. They were too young to stay home. And then when I would come home, one of us would do the cooking and the other one would, check in with the kids. And then I did a lot of my work, my online business, after the kids were in bed or early in the morning. And that was alone time. And you get so much more accomplished because you're not being interrupted every 5 to 10 minutes. Other ways, though, that you can find alone time is quiet boxes are my secret weapon. I absolutely love them. You can use them for any age group. My first tip for creating them is make sure that whatever is in that box or bag, we actually had bags so they could take them in the car while we were waiting for appointments and things, is make sure they're things that your kids are interested in.
I have to tell you, when you first said quiet boxes, I thought you meant like a giant refrigerator box that you crawl into. I'm not even kidding. I'm like, okay, that might make some of us feel a little claustrophobic, but I will do that. Okay, so
So
quiet boxes are not what I was just thinking.
no, so I'll explain what they are, which I should have
Although
done.
it'd make a great meme, right?
Yes, it would. Although some days I would definitely like that big box.
Yeah, I have.
Definitely alone. So quiet box are a lot like those busy bags that you see on Pinterest, except you don't put anything loud in them. And the reason being is the last thing you want happening when you're on a conference call is like someone playing the recorder or the drums. And they will. I mean,
Yes.
even in a quiet box, they will find things that are loud. So, and you want to make sure that what's in them is appropriate for where you're going. So don't let them play with moon sand in the car. Trust me. So those are things, getting the kids used to respecting those boundaries. And even the adults, I'm going to be totally transparent here. Adults, they mean well. And I'm like, hey, I'm working. And they're like, oh, yeah, yeah, okay. And then they're like, hey, I want to show you this. And you're like, I'm working. So, we have to remind them. I actually had my husband create me a sign that I hang on the wall. It says, this is when I'm working. And, adults will come in and I just point to the sign and they're like, oh, right. And they leave. But it takes, you have to respect your own boundaries too. I find if you don't take them seriously, if you're like, this is when I'm going to work, and then you don't, no one else is going to respect them either. You have to start with you. And then teaching the kids. Kids are usually easier to train. They get used to the rhythms, especially if you can keep it pretty reliable, like Monday mornings, Wednesday afternoon. My schedule is always changing, so it was a little bit more difficult because I didn't have that set schedule. But again, that's how we made it work for us. Homeschooling is so flexible and there's so much freedom in it that it was really the best part of working in homeschooling.
I know it to be flexible and freedom filled as well, but I have learned that I created less free and less flexible because I tell myself these are the things that I need to do to be a successful homeschooler, or this is the way that we want to have the best education for our children, or we need to include all these different elements. And I, of course, am conventionally schooled like most people that I know that homeschool. But so I've got that background. I've got my post-secondary education. I've got my husband's post-secondary education, and all of it makes to be a lot of expectation. And so I actually have a challenge in lowering or altering my expectation to make it like flexible.
Mm-hmm.
How do you create that flexibility for yourself? You're coming from a conventional background as well.
Well, I was public schooled and correspondence and homeschooled, so I have a mix of everything. And I definitely fell into the trap of doing public school at home for the first couple of years. I mean, it was so bad. I cringe telling this story, but I'm going to tell it because in case you were like me and you're doing these things. So I had my kids sit at the table, and I mean, they were little. And they had to call me Mrs. McKinnon, and they had to raise their hand. They needed to ask anything. And I really thought, I had to drill it into my kids' head that I was teacher and mom. And it took a long time for me to let go of that expectation that I could be both at the same time. I could have fun. I didn't have to be glued to the table. And, so I started there, and it was a very gradual process because as a working mom, I mean, we're talking 10, 11 years ago, and I was in a community where nobody else was really homeschooling. I had two friends that had homeschooled. One had finished, she graduated her kids, and the other one, was in it. And I find homeschool moms fall in two categories. There's the ones that love to talk about it and share, and then there's the opposite. And I had the opposite. So, they just, they were doing their own thing, but they didn't really want to share what they were doing. And I was so overwhelmed and lost and stuck. And Google was not my friend. I don't even know if it existed back then. So I really had to make my own mistakes and learn along the way. But it came to a light bulb moment that my son was at the babysitter's, and he learned something without me. He wasn't sitting at a table. He wasn't raising his hand. He came home and he told me all about it. And I was shocked. I was blown away. I was like, what do you mean? We haven't studied this in homeschooling. How can you learn these things? That moment, that looking back, I would say that totally changed the trajectory of our homeschool because I realized they didn't have to be sitting down to learn. And, once I tell new homeschoolers, once you see that in your kids, take them to the grocery store if they're really little and say, show them the shapes of the can and the, rectangle. And, when they're, as they're older, talk about nature and what's outside and name the trees and talk about the cycles. Once you see that your kids are always learning, you can't unsee it.
Yes.
You can't. And you're just like, it's I don't want to say magical, but it's kind of amazing because it starts clicking, you start seeing them making these connections. And that's when I learned I didn't have to stick to the books. I didn't have to do what anyone else told me. I truly could work and homeschool. I could homeschool on the weekend. And I felt like a little bit of a rebel here because, we could take our day off on Wednesday. So I used to have Wednesday was my day off. So that's when we hit the library. That's when we did the parks and the playgrounds and the museums and all the fun stuff because, we had the place to ourselves and we could do that. So once I started doing that and breaking those confinements that I placed on myself, nobody else was saying you should do that. But I was doing it to myself. I was hedging myself into one way of making this work. And once I stopped doing that, homeschooling was so much more fun.
Yeah, and that was your firstborn as well?
Yeah. Because my
So
kids are only 22 months apart. So
yeah, my firstborn as well taught me that to really, she was an outside the box learner. You'd have to meet her. She was the one telling me that I'm doing Latin wrong with my kids. She is a very strong-hearted person, but she has taught me so much. And I unschooled her. I sat her down in a Starbucks and I said, we're going to unschool now because I'd read a bunch of John Holt or John Taylor Gatto. And she was like, yay, I don't want to school. And so for 6 months, we radically unschooled. And I just recommend unschooling reading all over the place to people because even if you're not aspiring to unschooling, it just, like you said, it is like that trigger that helps you as a homeschool mom see that your kids are learning animals. It's what is meant to happen inside of us. We learn, we pay attention to stuff around us, we grow, we develop our own aptitudes. We're not necessarily interested in the things that are specific to a school curriculum, but we are very interested and we will engage. And when you start seeing that, and you see that on a regular, then you're like, why am I doing all this busy work and creating all these controlled environments for my child that require an awful lot of energy from me and sometimes some serious pushback from the kids if I can just keep giving them a little bit more freedom. So yeah, you're right. That's, by the way, I didn't get my kids to call me Mrs. Weidrich, but everything else I definitely did. And I had an 8-month-old on my lap and a 3-year-old playing around the other 2 kids while we were doing Susan Wise Bauer's very, very detailed tome. Her, what is the book called? I should know it. I've read it so many times. A Well-Trained Mind. And so my 8-year-old is writing 2-page narratives on what we read for an hour. Yeah, anyway. Yeah, you got to trust your child, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I have very textbook workbook kids. They love workbooks and textbooks and online computer. Like if a computer can tell them, do this and they can check off their boxes, they're happy. But what they didn't know is that we would do that for like a couple hours and then we would go have fun. I never told them we were homeschooling. I didn't tell them they were learning. They didn't need to know that. I just wrote it all down for our reports. So, sometimes we just can have fun with our kids and you'd be surprised how many different things that they can learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of freedom right there. How did you, over all of these years, include you? Are you still learning that too?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Include me in.
Yeah. So how did you, over all of those years, include your needs or the things that you wanted to do, like your alone time or, time for fun or time to learn or time to develop your skills for business?
So surprisingly, when I first returned to work, I didn't at all. And I think as moms, we get very caught up in, we have to be mom all the time. I started quitting, is what I would call it. I would quit at 8 o'clock at night. I was done. I wouldn't clean. I wouldn't cook. I wouldn't do laundry. I didn't pick up things. I didn't answer to mom. I would take 30 minutes and hide in my bedroom. So that's where it started. I returned to work, went through burnout, went through survival mode, got very, very sick. And my husband and I finally had a talk where I was like, I cannot do everything because I was working, homeschooling, cleaning the house, doing all the shopping, doing all the budgeting. I was doing it all because I thought I had to and because I thought I could, which was wrong. So we went through a really rough time. And I finally just, my husband's like, how can I help? And I realized that I never asked for help. I just I don't know. I didn't think that was a possibility, you know. I was doing everything for my kids and I forgot that they are perfectly capable of doing certain things. I mean, at a young age. So, you know, your 5-year-old can straighten the shoe. You know, your 6-year-old can throw toys in a bin. Your 8-year-old can load the washer. You know, little things that take something off your plate. So I started quitting and my husband started doing the budgeting and the grocery shopping and we split the cooking and you know we started helping each other out and that gave me the room and the space in my schedule for self-care, for taking care of me. And I started out, you know, the way I recommend everything small. So I started with like 5 minutes, taking a cup of coffee, closing the door for 5 minutes, taking a time out, letting everything go. And eventually I built up and you know over the years self-care has become such an important part of my life and I've encouraged the kids to do it. You know, you need that time to gather your thoughts. And so part of my self-care is my online business. I get to help other people and that makes me so happy. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I had to learn everything. I didn't know anything at all. And so I got really excited when I made a button on my website. I remember that. You know, you click the button and it went to a page. I had never done that before. That was really exciting, and nobody else in my family understood why I was so thrilled. But it's great because all of a sudden I realized that as moms, we need to keep learning things that are interesting to us. So, you know, because I stopped doing that when I had kids. You know, everything was about the kids. Everything was about the kids, and everything was about my job. And I had to learn things from my job. But like many of your listeners, I'm sure we've all had a job we didn't necessarily like. So, you know, our kids learn a lot from that, by the way. They get to see how you handle things that you don't like, but you have to do anyway. So, my business was my self care, and I had to learn a lot of different things. And I'm still learning, and it's fun. And now that my kids are older, we get to talk about it and share, you know, how all that fits.
When you talk about that learning button and learning how to do that, I really identify because I have learned everything from scratch pretty much since last October is what I would say. I've written forever, but actually doing all of the more online blogging type stuff or the podcasting or you know whatever, the coaching, all of that I've had to learn myself, just like you said. But then one afternoon within the first 2 weeks into isolation, the first wave, I said to the kids, why don't you put together like a COVID Instagram for our local area and encourage people to share their stories of people coming back so that everybody knows that they need to be at home in isolation instead of wandering around with friends and that sort of thing. And my youngest at the time, 11, said, I'll create a website for this page and for all of this community. And I was like, sure, yeah, go ahead. And he did. And I was like, what? You know how to do this? I don't know how to do this stuff. So yeah, somebody in my family would appreciate figuring out how to do the button as well. What do you think the myths of self-care for homeschool moms are? The things that homeschool moms think that no, it can't happen, or, you know, I can't include certain aspects of self-care. Do you have ideas?
Yeah. So, the first myth is that self care is selfish. And it just breaks my heart. It literally, like, I feel so sad when I hear moms saying that because, you know, we forget how important it is. We take care of everybody else, but if we don't take care of ourselves, then we can't take care of everybody else because there's nothing left. And I also find people have this myth of what self care looks like. You know, self care has to be baths with bubbles or a spa day. And I hate the bath. If I'm going to take a bath, it is not going to be self care because I have to clean that sucker before I get in it. So, you know, I always tell moms self care is whatever recharges you. And that can be anything. It doesn't, you know, what recharges me is not going to recharge you. And, you know, I think that's a big myth that moms have. You know, it takes all this time. You have to have like 5 hours to go to the spa. And I'm like, nobody has time for 5 hours. I don't know a single mom who is at home homeschooling and says, boy, I'm bored. I have 5 hours. I should go practice self care. It's just, it's not going to happen. So, you know, those are the three big things that I think we need to tackle. And I think more moms need to share what they're doing. You know, I think you need to share the imperfect, non-spa related self-care. So self-care can be anything, some days for me, it's like blasting music and doing a dance in my kitchen, and it takes 2 minutes, but I'm like, okay, now I'm ready to tackle this thing I don't like doing. But, I think if more people shared really what it looks like and the purpose, our goal is to recharge ourselves, to take care of ourselves, then I think it would be really good.
Recently I'm finding the discussion of self-care to be a whole different direction because of the pandemic and going into the second wave, and where we live, we're going back into, well, it's not prescribed, but we're going back into what feels more like a lockdown. It's not officially. And so then I'm saying, okay, how am I going to deal with this practically? And it's probably not that radical for a lot of people, but for me it is. I'm like, I am going to watch more Netflix. I am intentional about it. I usually fall asleep with Netflix. It was not my default in the first wave. I got busy, I got working, right? And the second thing is to actually pretend this thing isn't happening, which sounds crazy on one hand. You can't actually pretend it's not happening because the news is ever present. And if you're on Facebook, you will discover it. It's reality. And at the same time, I need to just go into my little bubble so that I'm not so preoccupied with what's happening outside of me. I don't mean ignore by not washing your hands or social distancing or not masking. Or not caring about other people, but actually just saying, okay, you got something to do, keep doing the thing without constantly engaging that media world or engaging the COVID stuff. Do you have thoughts around that?
I think you're right. And I think also giving ourselves the freedom to feel all our feelings. As a mom, we always feel like, okay, I have to be strong for the kids. And, they can't know that I'm worried or concerned or stressed. And I'm not saying have a complete breakdown in front of your kids, obviously, because that would stress them out. But I think it's okay for us to talk to our kids and say, this is what's happening. I'm concerned. And brainstorm ways to be safe and still, and then have those feelings and then let them go.
Mhm.
Address, be free to have those feelings like, okay, I'm really upset, and then let them go and focus on the positive things. So there are actually a lot of positive things coming out of the virus. And one of them I know working moms are loving and it finally came to where I live, is online grocery shopping.
Yes.
That wasn't, it was something that was in the cities, but us in the smaller towns or in the country, we didn't really need that. So it wasn't available. So that's kind of like a positive thing for us, is like, okay, we can now order our groceries online and go pick them up. That's great. It saves me so much money because I'm one of those people that shops on my way out, picking up all the things I don't need. So I'm not doing that. And, spending time with my kids. So I'm going to be honest. A lot of people are like, oh, as a homeschool mom, you might not notice the difference. But we do. Like, this is not our normal homeschool routine. Our homeschool, our kids are on the go. They're with friends, they're with other family members. So, we've learned how to coexist and when we each need our own space. So we actually, during this virus, we redid my daughter's room because it was a little girl room. It had Tinkerbell since she was like 3, and now she's almost 17, and she's definitely grown out of Tinkerbell. We've made that like her safe place, and now she goes and she hangs out there. And now when she needs to step away from mom or her brother or her dad, she can go do that. And so we're learning those cues of when we need to be alone, but we're also learning how to be together and have fun. So we're starting to do game night, we're starting to do movie night, where before we were so busy we didn't have time for these things. So there are some positive things, and they might be small, they might seem insignificant, but if we can change our mindset and focus on those things, I think it's really important as we're going into. For us, we're also getting not quite the lockdown, but it's restricted for safety reasons. So we need to be able to handle those things.
What would you say for all those new homeschool families this year? This is November. By the end of November, at least in my experience in the first few years, I was so happy to put all my plans into practice by September. And then by November, I'm like, okay, not sure this is going to work, but it's okay. We've got Christmas coming, so we've got some fun stuff to expect. Definitely by January, after it's all done, I'm like, okay, we're good. We need to not homeschool anymore. Let's send them back to school. Except for some people, that definitely isn't an option. What do you say to the moms that are getting kind of tired right now?
Oh, hang in there. You know, homeschooling has its ups and downs. And I always think that the first year, the whole year, was a learning experience because you get to go through all of those things that you just mentioned. You know, you go through the excitement of getting plans in place and you're ready to try them out. And then you try them out and some work and some don't. So, one thing is keep doing what's working. And the things that aren't working, try to figure out why they're not working. And if you don't know, ask your kids, what do they not like about this, or why is it not working? And you'd be surprised at some of the ideas. And I used to like to use December break as a way to reevaluate. I would go through the questions like, what do we like that we're doing? What's working? What's not working? How can we fix it? And then in January, you'd be all like, almost that September feeling again, right? Like, okay, we're going to try this. And then you try that for a month or two and you'll notice that, it's starting not to work again. And so you reevaluate. And that's kind of how my homeschool, worked for years. We would have those ups and downs of things that were working and not to get discouraged by the things that aren't, because you're learning. Now okay, this doesn't work. Maybe for this child. So, but take breaks when you need them. I find most parents, working moms, burn out in January, February. We have the holiday rush, we have the New Year excitement. We're homeschooling. Some of us are working. You have a lot on your plate. So just be really intentional with your time and your energy and understand that sometimes we have to say no. So that's kind of my advice. But if you're brand new homeschooling this year, I want you to know that this is not what homeschooling looks like. This is not normal. We're all struggling. I mentioned earlier that my son graduated, and I recently had a mom come to me, and she's a new homeschooler, and she said, my son is so lonely. How can I fix this? And she's like, homeschooling, everybody said my kids were going to have all these friends and they'd have all these opportunities, and they're not. And it's sad. And I just said to her, I said, my son is graduated and he's lonely. It's not just a homeschooling thing. It's a people everywhere thing. And so we need to be creative. We need to think outside the box a little, take advantage of Zoom, using Zoom to connect with their friends and family, telephone calls, texting, letters, games they can do over online. We have to get creative for our kids, but please realize this is not what homeschooling looks like, and it's hard on all of us. So if you need help, reach out to the community, whatever, and you need a community. So whether it's online or offline, reach out to that community and see what they have for ideas.
Yeah, one of my girls also said that this year she discovered that she doesn't actually want to spend as much time outside of home and do as many extracurriculars. So it was really, I think it's useful. And there's so much potential solitude for kids in the teenage years to get, even though it's definitely, like you said, it's a challenging time for everyone. It's a massive shift for everyone. And we as homeschoolers were busy, extracurricular focused kind of people. We did a lot of, like we do a lot of academics, but we do a lot of extracurriculars. And it was a huge shift for us. But I was surprised when my 17-year-old said, I'm actually glad I'm not doing as many extracurriculars. And so there's more time to think and more time to understand yourself or to learn about yourself. But to back up to something you said a little bit earlier, you were talking about learning about your kids, and that this year, the first year for a lot of new homeschool moms, is really an exploration. And I'm pretty sure I've experienced that like every year, really. And I keep learning about my kids and I keep learning about myself. And everything is just like one big unschooling experiment. This is what I've experienced for myself in homeschooling. And when you talk about strewing, way back in the beginning of this conversation about strewing different objects or different activities or, extra or different resources around the house. I guess it's an unschooling concept too, to strew things, or really just means leave stuff out that look messy, but kids might get curious about and might pursue. And I think the combination of seeing our kids pursue learning opportunities and throwing stuff out there so that maybe they can, it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. And there's no magic trick that says, okay, now you've got an education that's perfect for your child or an ideal homeschool. It's not a thing to just have it magically done overnight. It's a constant process. And just like, you know, we are learning about our kids, we're also learning about ourselves and growing up during this entire time. And the whole thing is just like one big unschooled experiment, whether you're unschooled or not.
Yes.
What would you say your favorite fun self-care strategy is? Something that actually is fun.
Oh, so I'm such a bookworm. So I love grabbing a cup of coffee and diving into a book and, you know, just shutting everything else out. So when my kids were younger, I actually didn't let myself read because I could so effectively close out the outside world that it wasn't safe when they were really little. So this is my favorite self-care activity. And a second runner-up again would be blasting music and singing very off-key and horribly along with it.
So I got to hear, what kind of music do you like listening to or dancing to or singing to?
Oh, everything. My kids laugh so hard because they're like, you never really know what's going to be on mom's playlist. Like, that's right.
Yeah, I'm disturbed that my kids actually associate some of our homeschool years with Kesha. Shh, don't tell anybody. I'm like, what? That's not classic homeschool, that's for sure. So at the end of our interviews, I usually ask 3 self-care strategy questions, some fun questions, really just to get to know you in a way maybe other people don't know. One of those is, what are you typically doing on a Friday night?
So on Friday nights, I don't know if you'd call this self-care or not, but my daughter and I love to watch baking shows.
Me too.
So, and
Both of us.
so I don't bake. I mean, can bake. I don't. She is my baker. She loves cake decorating, and she's so talented, very artsy. I am not. I cook and I do recipes. I throw everything in and see what happens. So we will veg out on my bed, and we'll bring in the laptop, and we have our, you know, our drinks and our snacks and the 2 cats, and we'll watch different baking shows. And our favorite right now is finished. It's the Great Canadian Bake Show.
Me too.
I love that show. And it's so nice because we've watched a couple other ones that we weren't too crazy about because they were really kind of not nice. But these ones, you know, the people are friendly and nice. And we've discovered that there is a British one that has several seasons. So we are now diving into that. So that is what we do on Friday nights.
Love it. Yeah, we're with you. We're doing it over here, other side of the country.
So we dig out the recipes, and so we're going to try a few. You can go online and get some of the recipes. I didn't know if you knew that.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, it should be fun.
So tell me, what is in your bookshelf, or what is on your book stand right now? What are you reading?
Oh, so right now my daughter is doing literary ventures for kids. They have a high school membership, and she's reading books that I didn't read in high school. Like, didn't even hear about. I don't know why. I keep checking. I did graduate, right? But I missed all these great books. So I just finished, or I'm almost finished, reading. Oh my goodness, what's it called? Up from Slavery. And because I didn't read that in school. And of course, I just finished Enola Holmes, which is totally different than the movie, by the way.
So there is a book behind that movie.
There are 6 books.
6 books.
I did not know that. I was so upset. I was like, because I love Sherlock Holmes. I was like, what? So, yes. So we watched the movie, which I never do. I always read the book first, and then I watch the movie and complain about the movie like a bookworm. But this time we watched the movie, which was really good. And then someone shipped me as a gift the book. So I read the book, and they are not the same, but it was very good.
Mm. So tell me, the name of your blog is Practical by Default. Where did that come from?
Oh, yeah. So I'm terrible at naming things, like absolutely terrible. And I was brainstorming. My blog is 4 years old, or almost 5 years old. And my husband, was standing there, and I am practical to a fault. Like, I am the person who asks for a laundry basket as a gift because mine's broken. I want things I can use. The only thing I've ever asked for a gift that it was not practical is a ring. But we've been married 20 years, and every year it's like I want, something I can use. It needs to be practical. And my husband is always complaining that I'm so practical. He's like, you're practical to a fault. It's like by default, practical is your setting. And I was like, that's me. That's what I'm going to use. So it doesn't really explain what I do, but it suits me perfectly.
But I've learned that we name our blogs or we name our whatever, something that probably is like a subconscious instinct. And then we learn gradually why we named it what we named it. So do you have any hunches why you might have named it that for
Oh,
your?
I picked it because he said it, and it was like, oh, okay, that fits, like it fits my personality perfectly. And anyone who's gone through my courses or done coaching with me is like, my advice is always, I try really hard to make sure it's practical, something you can do.
Yeah.
I don't believe in like making it so hard and so difficult and so out of reach that you can't do it. So no, I picked it because it was easy and it suits me.
So tell me, where can we find you online and what services do you provide?
So you can find me at practicalbydefault.com, and there I share solutions for the working homeschool mom. So we cover all kinds of things like from where to find childcare to homeschooling curriculum and programs to how to make it all fit. I also have an online community on Facebook called the Working Homeschool Mom Club. And inside that Facebook group is all working moms. It's worldwide. I started it because I felt like I was alone. That's the biggest struggle about being a working mom. You don't really fit into all the homeschooling moms, and you don't really fit into the working moms. I felt, there's got to be more than just me out there doing this. And so we are now 20,000 members, I believe, that are worldwide. So it's a worldwide group, which is super cool because you get to learn about like working moms in Australia and Africa and Europe and besides the United States and Canada. So it's really, really cool. And then I have a smaller paid community, which is the Coffee Club. And there, it's one part community. So I'm available. We do Sunday coffee chats where we do some training and we hang out, and it's much smaller. I find that the big group is great, but a lot of people say it's like trying to drink water from a fire nozzle. So much information. So the smaller group, it's better for that. We have monthly workshops. We have guest workshops. We do co-working sessions, all kinds of fun things. And then I have a mastermind group, which is, again, really small. So we meet once a week and we do lots of, personal coaching and time management and all that stuff. All that's fun stuff.
So much to offer. So what would you say the most exotic place is that you've got as members in your group?
Oh, that's such a hard thing. Because like I said, it's so big. Even like once in a while I do those where in the world are you posts.
Right.
And everybody gets to comment, and we have the Philippines, we have Sri Lanka, and we have, I don't know. That's a tough question.
It's a wildly useful group for this year.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you.
Yeah, so many people that you can definitely address. And that tip about the alarm clock, every time I talk about it, I always reference you. That was a really good tip. That is still applicable for teenagers at times.
Yes. And sometimes, it's the smallest things that make the biggest impact.
Exactly. That's a good
We
thing to
can
say.
easily overlook those little tiny things, but they make a massive impact in our homeschool. So
Well, I'm certain that all the ideas that you have and the group that you've got would be super helpful for a lot of working moms or working moms that are about to homeschool and not realize that that's what they're about to do. Thank you for joining me today. It was a real pleasure to get to know you.
all right. Well, thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
It really was. You know what?